Mr. Flynn, his honor is here.
Thank you. Just a moment. You ready, Roxy?
Billy, I'm scared.
You got nothing to worry about. It's all a circus, kid. A three-ringed circus. These trials, the whole world. It's all...
Come on, come on, come on, come on.
Lisa Wells, 700 WLW. It's 10:07, and joining me is Dr. Anthony Napoleon, who is a psychologist, also trained as a paralegal, who has studied, I guess, the racism, crime, courtroom procedures, a little bit of everything according to his CV. He was a guest of Eddie and Tracy this week, and I heard him, and I was so impressed. I thought, I would love to have this guy on to talk to him a little bit about the California shooting that just occurred. Dr. Napoleon, welcome to 700 WLW.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Good. So I went over your CV. It seems like you've done a little bit of training everywhere. Where did you go to school?
Indiana University.
Nice. So not far away from the tri-state area at all. And so what are you currently involved in? What's your current practice?
I am a forensic psychologist who works in the court system on behalf of both prosecution and defense at the federal and state level.
Gotcha. Okay, so I heard you on with Eddie and Tracy this week, and you were talking a little bit about, the predisposition or some of the mental conditions of individuals that would create an environment where we saw this guy in California go completely crazy and target individuals, create a YouTube video. And is there anything, obviously a lot of people have proposed tougher gun law legislation that would, had made it more difficult for him to purchase a weapon. I feel like if you want to get a gun and commit these types of heinous crimes, there is no legislation that's going to prevent it. So really it comes down to treating mental health people and addressing these issues on the front end is what is, in my opinion, the only thing that's going to prevent future tragedies like this occurring. In your practice, though, do you think realistically, is it possible to identify people that are suffering from these illnesses and give them the type of treatment that would prevent this type of tragedy from occurring?
First of all, let me say that with regard to the gun, this young man, Elliot Rodger, used three weapons. He used a knife, he used a gun, and he used a car. I believe that he killed as many people with a kitchen knife as he did with the gun. Secondly, now that we've been into this for about a week and the 24-hour news cycle, even though this is a very interesting topic to news producers, it's about run its course. And what I have learned is, what I always see is that the public is fascinated with a single cause. They always want to fingerprint a single unitary cause. Aha, it's this.
It's this, and we can fix it by that, which I think it's so stupid because it's not ever a single cause for anything.
Right. Now, as a forensic psychologist, I did my original training in medical psychology. So I had an internship that I did in a hospital and did a fellowship then in plastic surgery. And when I was in plastic surgery, I learned from the senior anesthesiologist that there are patterns in crime. We say in science that all of science is nothing but the discernment of patterns, because we think if we can see a pattern, something that reoccurs, we can anticipate that pattern and therefore prevent it. When I'm called into a crime scene, it's always after the fact. Mm-hmm. But there's always a behavioral fingerprint. As a former prosecutor, you understand what I'm
There's a pattern that occurred before the crime that if we could identify, right, perhaps we could stop.
That's right. And something about criminals that's fascinating that you'll acknowledge, they try their best not to get caught. I was giving a seminar the other day, and I talked about the CSI technology, and that as soon as fingerprint technology became well known, the glove started showing up at crime scenes.
Mhm.
And then when we discovered how to take a fingerprint or mitochondrial DNA, crooks, would-be perpetrators, started going to, if I can use the stereotype, biker bars and picking up cigarette butts and beer cans,
Mhm.
and then taking them to crime scenes and contaminating the DNA field, so, because they assumed that people who frequented biker bars had a criminal record. So there's always this cat and mouse game. But the one thing they've not been able to figure out is their behavioral profile. And that accounts for why there are forensic psychologists, and it accounts for why I am so busy. So we had a tendency, we look at things differently. One is I'm intent upon solving the crime, so I want to know what exactly happened. I'm not interested in single cause theories because people are way too complex. Situations are way too complex. I heard the lead up to this segment where in Cincinnati we get a news feed of interesting crimes that I've defined across the country,
Mhm.
and this hate crime that occurred at a Taste of Cincinnati is fascinating. But again, from a forensics perspective, I'm fascinated because it is a multi-layered, multifactorial. It's not as simple as people want to make it. Human beings have a tendency to single cause every complex situation. It's a this, it's a that. That's why we engage in the behaviors that we do. Our diet. Well, if you don't eat this, then you'll
get sick.
Exactly.
Right.
It doesn't. So if your audience is interested, and by the way, of the polyfactors, none of them are sufficient. I try to use the analogy that if you take hops and yeast and barley and water, and you mix it in the exact right proportion, you cook it, you get something called beer.
Mhm.
But barley doesn't give you beer, neither does yeast. And you can pick your analogy.
Right.
Carrot cake is another one. Carrots don't make carrot cake, but they're a necessary ingredient. So this guy and your situation you have in Cincinnati now, all of these things are polyfactorial. And by the way, they're counterintuitive. You see, if they were obvious, you wouldn't have folks like me who make a very good living doing this. Mm-hmm. If surgery was easy, you wouldn't have to go to school for 15 years to learn how to do it. So that's sort of the overview. And the press's coverage of any of these events is rather like one big Rorschach test. Everybody, you show them the card, and they project upon that card what's going on in their head. So in one instance, you show them a card, and they might say, yeah, that's two bears dancing, having a good time. And another person says, you know what? Those two bears are about ready to eat the campers that are just around the corner. So,
yeah, it's all a reflection of what's going on in your own mind. What do you think when you look at this? I think he was 22 years old. He ended up killing the 6 college students and then eventually himself. He didn't seem to have any sort of. It's like he had planned this ahead of time, and he knew he wasn't going to survive, that he was going to kill himself. And so is that. And he had a hatred towards people that were attractive, people that had shunned him his entire life, people that he didn't fit in with, people that weren't like him. So when you look at as someone who has that kind of ideology, is there any way, because I think of it as, can a lifetime of what is perceived rejection, because that's what he thought it was. He felt rejected. Can a lifetime of rejection like that cause someone to basically snap? Because you would think if it does, this would be something that we would see more frequently, but we don't. But what is different about this kid, this 22-year-old? Was the rejection so severe, or just the way he perceived it to be so severe that he just went crazy?
Right. Let me quote Oliver Wendell Holmes when he looked at this notion of crime and informed us and told us that you have to look at this through pathological eyes. Your series of very intelligent questions were flawed. Do you know how they were flawed? They were because you're normal, because you're using reason.
Because I think reason, yeah.
That's right.
And
exactly.
people like that don't use reason because they
exactly.
don't.
So you see, a lifetime. Well, first of all, here's some of the recurring patterns that we know with these guys empirically. Empirically means that the data are conclusive. We actually have done the tests. It's rather, when I say empirically, I know how many teeth are in a horse's head. How do you know that, Dr. Anthony? Because we've
counted them.
We've counted them. Okay. So one, there is always a neuropsychology, a biologically based, not causal. It's not genetic per se, but there is a genetic predisposition to not feel for or with other people. So, in other words, these individuals across the board have an inability to interact with the environment in such a way that you can read cues and know where you are. Imagine, I'll use this analogy. Imagine you have a driver's license, but you don't understand stop signs. You don't understand road signs. You don't understand colors. You don't understand what those yellow lines and dashed lines mean. That's what these people are like. That's what it is in their head. Sometimes non-forensics, forensic psychologists and psychiatrists diagnose them as suffering from Asperger's syndrome, or which is kind of like an autism. It all boils down to a neurobiological wiring. Now, is it sufficient? No. There are lots of Asperger kids, lots of autism suffering kids who don't go out. The vast majority do not go out and kill. But
they don't go out and kill.
That's right.
They don't engage in the type of crime that we saw in California.
So let's analogize the neuropathology as the nutmeg in the recipe for carrot cake. The next ingredient is psychologically they brood, they ruminate, they stew, and also they don't have a relief valve. I have described their brains in seminars as they have a hoarder's brain. You know these television shows. God only knows why people are fascinated by this.
Yes.
But they they have candy wrappers from 1979
that they
in
can't
their
get rid of.
kitchen, and they can't, and it's piled 6 feet high. Well, in their mind, brains. The reason I'm able to talk about things and you remember them is that brains, our human brains and cat brains, feline brains, take the world, and there are stimuli in the world. There are visual and auditory and somesthetic and sense, and they are translated into symbols in our brain because we can carry symbols. It's rather like your hard disk is your beautiful writing is a series of ones and O's in a particular sequence. So we have all these symbols in our head. Now, most of us, when we have let's say we're driving in traffic and someone cuts us off, we might hit the horn or we might flip them off.
Give them the bird or scream at them.
That's right.
Epithets but then you let it go.
In other words, unlike the hoarder, we eat the candy, throw away the wrapper.
Right.
What does he do? He eats the candy, and there's the wrapper. He doesn't get rid of it. In fact, he folds it, and he keeps it neatly in his drawer. So they don't have the ability to bleed off the slides, and they are so easily slighted. You look at them the wrong way. So that's the second ingredient. Let's say that's the sugar in the recipe. The third one is, and this is fascinating because it is ubiquitous and it's part of a culture. And by the way, this is one of the factors that affected the Taste of Cincinnati incident. And it has to do with the social engineers who in the late 1960s came up with a harebrained scheme to create artificially high self-esteem in everyone.
Oh, yeah, everyone's a winner. Everybody gets a participation trophy. Everybody,
That's right.
There are no losers. And I've always thought that was fundamentally flawed.
It is fundamentally flawed, but...
Because there are winners and losers in life.
There are winners and losers. You don't have to be harsh about it. I shared with someone the other day, I said, let's look at some of the more interesting details of this. You know, teachers are forbade to use red pens in correcting papers.
Why? Because it appears harsh.
That's exactly right.
It appears
That's
harsh.
exactly right. That's right.
But I mean, isn't that what's wrong? Is that why we're seeing such fundamentally screwed up kids? I mean, can't there be some sort of correlation study between what we've thought was a good idea of making every child feel like they have self-worth and that they're they can't be the next president?
I've written about this extensively because once again you're using your good sense and your normal eyes and perception because you think that the people who developed this artificially high self-esteem scheme were well-intended.
They were. We thought we were doing the right thing.
Actually, they weren't. The actual originators, the people who, and they were PhDs like me, were originated in think tanks who were intent upon changing and reformatting the culture such that it would create a citizenry. Now, you got to stick with me here because I've seen the papers. I know what they actually intended. So that they could reorganize and reformat the culture, people, so that people would be more supplicant and controllable. Now, the people who actually put it into place were all on board. They had absolutely no idea what the PhDs in think tanks of the late 1960s had constructed and schemed, because it felt good to the people on the ground, the teachers, the counselors.
Sure, there's a very touchy-feely response to it. And I'm sorry I have to cut you off because we're out of time. But for more information, have you published anything on this? Do you have a website? Where can people go for more information on this? Because I think that the participation trophies, I truly believe that that's probably where this all started and going wrong. So, Dr. Napoleon, do you have a website or anything we can go to, books?
NapoleonLegal.com, and we currently have 3 books out. And the book is the first book is Awakening Beauty. The second book is The Progressive Virus, which is a scholarly treatise on some of the things we just finished talking about. And then myself, along with Yevgeny Yevtushenkov, wrote the Marxist Operation Manual, how Marxists plan to destroy America. And it's actual workbook smuggled out of the Soviet Union and used here to train subversive operatives who were intent upon imploding America's existent culture. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's exactly what happened.
All right, Dr. Napoleon, thanks for your time.